You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Before we get started, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Most of the podcasts are now available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Joining me on today's cricket discussion is the founder of Opening Up, an organisation which was established in 2014 in the UK. The organisation was started following the tragic death of Sefton Park Cricket Club wicketkeeper Alex Miller. The organisation has been on a campaign to raise awareness for mental health issues and suicide prevention, and educating cricketers on the importance of mental health and on suicide prevention. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Mark Boyns. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, lovely to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
Same here, Mark. It's great to have you on to chat about Opening Up, the great work that you do with that and mental health in general, which is a big topic to talk about in our lives. And it's something that we should talk about more often, but we don't. So hopefully everyone watching or listening to the episode today can get something out of this episode and implement that in their lives and help someone else. So Mark, as I do with all my guests that I've interviewed on the podcast, I like to take them back to when they first got into cricket. It's been fascinating to listen to people's memories on how they got into the game. So let's go back to the beginning, Mark. Growing up in the UK, what are your memories of playing cricket?
Well, I remember playing cricket at primary school. So as a, 5, 6, 7-year-old with the plastic bats and the orange wind balls, and just really loving doing that during the summer, and then winter or autumn would be for football or soccer, as you'd call it in Australia. Yeah. But as I got older, I found that my interest in cricket just kept on developing. And as I reached probably my later teens, football became less of an interest and cricket really just sort of dominated. But for me as an English person, early 90s when I was getting into cricket, unfortunately, there appeared to be no chance of winning the Ashes, which was disappointing. But yeah. I used to love those home series where we'd play the Cornell Insurance test matches against New Zealand, South Africa, Pakistan, India, and of course Australia as well. And watching them on telly and then going into the schoolyard and trying to be Philip de Freitas or Graham Hick or Michael Afton or whoever it was. So have such clear memories, even though that is now about 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's how everyone gets into the game when you watch those early series on TV or played in primary school. That's how I got into the game myself in primary school. I remember those orange bats as well, with tennis balls and the orange stumps. It's just great memories to have. And that's why we love the game. That's why we get into the game. So that's great to hear your story, how you got into the game. Seeing that we're talking about mental health today and opening up, I know you've been through your own personal journey yourself, and you've been open with that. Can you tell us how that all started, you know, the battles that you had with your own mental health? And also, since starting Opening Up, has that made you improve your mental health better since you started the organisation?
Well, yes. First of all, I think the origins of mental ill health in myself go back to my time at university, or quite possibly before that. But the real strongest symptoms came around when I was coming towards the end of my time at university. And the most difficult thing was this was 2007. And as a topic, mental health was not widely discussed. And illness certainly was something that I'd imagine lots of people in similar positions to me wouldn't have found possible to talk about because of the worry of how it will be judged, what that would mean for people's view of you, and also just a misunderstanding of what the symptoms meant. So I found myself being completely consumed by this inescapable low mood. So not just over the course of a day or two, but it went on for a fortnight, 3 weeks and longer, so much so that the things that I love, like cricket, like my studies at the time with friends, I just couldn't find any joy from. And I got to the point where I found that was just normal. And I thought that was the way that life should be, and felt that that was something that almost I deserved. And as a result, withdrew quite a lot from people. And I think the thing I look back on now as a direct contrast with how it is today is that there was a mixture of two things. One, I did a fantastic job at concealing it. Because if I was in public situations, I would try my best to just act like everything was okay, maybe reinforce some distracting behaviors, like making sure I was cracking jokes or I was right in the mix of it, drinking and socializing so that people wouldn't have a chance to see. But I also look and think there was definitely times where there might have been signs to other people, and it's sad to look back and think that people around me just wouldn't have had an understanding either to be able to put their hand out and say, is there anything we can do? And then quite a while later, when I knew a lot more about this through opening up, I had another particularly bad episode, 2015. But the thing there was the conversation had moved on to a large extent. I'd been a lot more open about mental health and mental ill health, particularly with the experience of opening up cricket, if not talking about my own experience. So then when I felt that I still felt alone, I still felt I couldn't share it with anyone, I do look back and think then one of the issues was that I made it pretty clear. I did literally ask for help at one point and got very little back. So it made me think even more about what reasons were there for that. Was it that people just didn't care? I think that's probably too simplistic. I think it's that perhaps they didn't know how to help and maybe were a bit reluctant to get involved in something they had little idea of. So to answer the second question, I think my understanding and my ability to manage my mental health or my mental fitness now has just come on so much so it's unrecognizable from all that time ago, knowing that there are things I can do proactively, not waiting for there to be a problem before I consider what's going on with my mind and the health of it. So now I can see things coming a bit sooner. I know what I can rely on as things day to day that can generally help build good mental health, and also be perhaps a bit more realistic about things. And a big thing for me was always having unrealistic expectations, wanting everything to go right or wanting certain things from other people when you can't control those things. And it's a bit of a cliche, but concentrating on the things that I can influence has given a greater peace of mind, which I think you can only achieve when you are healthy enough to be able to consider what's going on around you.
Yeah. It's quite interesting to hear your journey and knowing that you're at peace, well, sort of at peace with it, but it comes and goes, doesn't it? I think you described it once. It's like mental health is like a continuum. It always continues on. It doesn't really stop. It doesn't really go away. It's just there. So you just have to manage it. And yeah, it's great that you're on the right track and doing some good stuff with opening up. Talking about opening up, I mentioned it briefly in the introduction, how you started opening up. Just tell us what made you want to start the organization and what are some of the programs and some of the courses that you do in terms of educating cricketers on mental health and suicide prevention?
Well, it started, the campaign started itself in 2014, but the origin of it goes back to 2012. So I play at a club in Liverpool in the UK called Sefton Park, and I had a friend there who had been through a lot of difficulties in terms of his health. And we reached a point in December of 2012 where Alex, my friend, took his own life. And in some ways, looking back, that was a complete shock, a complete surprise. But in others, a lot of the signs were there that this could have happened. So initially, amongst all of the questions and the uncertainty and the grief that people were experiencing, I kept on thinking that there was something about this that was preventable, or at least could be discussed more, because initially the people, me and my teammates, sort of, I guess, felt that this was such a one-off. It was incredible, impossible to fathom. But then with a bit of reading and research, it became clear that actually this isn't just a one-off. It happens all too frequently. And in the UK, it's the biggest killer of men under the age of 45. So that then planted a seed in my head that's like, right, this is something that surely needs to be talked about more. So the initial idea was just to go to the clubs in the local region and just tell them about what had happened and what was available, or what is available for them to seek support. And after a summer of doing that, I felt like the itch hadn't been quite scratched, and there was a bit more interest from people a bit further afield about having these discussions. So now we're in 2022. The core of what goes on hasn't really changed. It is still about, where possible, going out to cricket clubs, whether that be in person or online, as we've had recently, and explaining a bit about what happened to Alex, but more and more talking about the positives around mental health, and saying, in actual fact, we shouldn't just wait for there to be a problem before we discuss it. And cricket, as a sport which has so much linked to the mind and mindset and mental skills, we can actually use the sport as a vehicle to promote better mental health. And that includes things like the teamwork element, the communication, the community, as well as skills like mindfulness and meditation to improve your focus and concentration for batting and bowling, but also to help you switch off day to day. So as time has gone on, it's just, for me, appeared that if cricket wasn't already there, it would have to be invented to do this important thing of making people realize that their mind and their mental health isn't just something which they should think about when there's a problem. Just like physically, we're generally proactive. We realize moving around a bit more is good for us, and what we put in our body is important. So for the mind as well, just helping people by starting a conversation to work out what works for them to look after their minds and those around them.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. What you're doing with opening up is great, and many cricketers are benefiting from you and what the team's doing in educating people on good mental health and positive mental health. So it's fantastic. Now that's the talking about yourself bit, Mark. Let's get into this cricket discussion. I chose some topics to talk about and discuss today in this discussion. The first one is, what is mental health? People have often heard this term used a lot, mental health, but are often confused by what it actually means. So Mark, can you tell us, what does mental health actually mean?
Well, yeah, it is a good question. I think a good way of starting to define it is to consider that mental health is not just ill health. So mental health is, like you mentioned earlier, a continuum which we're all on, where at one end we've got our very best and at the other end we've got our very worst, and we'll exist somewhere in between those 2 points at any given time. So mental health is really about how healthy we are in our mind, in our brain. And for me, it has to be about what we can do positively to prevent there being illness, to not just say we wait along for the illnesses to come around. But it is important also to acknowledge that side of it, where there can be problems, and recognizing some of the signs and symptoms of a decline in our mental health. And I always think it works best to consider mental health as closely linked to physical health as we can, and that for physical health we consider the fitness element, the day-to-day element, as well as perhaps the injuries or the problems, the same should exist for mental health as well. And that for that reason, we think of it as mental fitness and what we can do to put in that is going to be good for it.
Yeah. So it's just like exercise really, but mental fitness, just improving the mental side of your physical health and also mental health. Yeah. So let's move on to our next topic and talk about mental health in international cricket. Now, we've seen more and more players in international cricket, male and female, Mark, come out openly and speak about their mental battles with their mental health over the years. And that's good to see cricketers taking that step. It's often confronting openly in a public space like a cricketer that many people are watching you, but to come out and speak about your own battles takes a lot of courage. So that's great to see. We've seen in the last 2 years, in particular, the number of players having mental health issues. Obviously, during the last 2 years, it's been very tough on everyone. Players are playing in bio bubbles, which has become the norm in cricket today. During these last 2 years, players have pulled out of international series and domestic competitions due to the bio bubbles and citing fatigue and time away from their families. That's one big factor in players taking a break to look after their mental health and well-being. But cricket being an intense game, Mark, with lots of pressure and expectations on the players, the pressure and expectations can have an effect on a player's mental health and well-being. Cricket is based on stats and performance. When players are not performing well, they cop the full brunt from the press, the media, and from the fans. Also, fans commenting on social media, often making abusive comments about a player or their performance. Cricketers are playing more cricket. The international schedule is more compacted as the years go on. With more cricket being played, cricketers are spending more time away from their families. All of these challenges that cricketers face do affect their mental health and well-being. So Mark, why do we see cricketers suffer from mental health? And is cricket doing enough to help players out with their mental health? If not, what can we do better?
Well, yeah, it's a very interesting area. And as you mentioned, there's been so many examples recently of players being very open about their experience, particularly with these bio bubbles, which on the face of it, from the outside looking in, a fan who would love the opportunity to play international cricket might consider it a dream to be able to, for example, at Old Trafford and the Ageas Bowl in England, where the players had been staying during those COVID series, had hotel rooms with the view being the pitch itself. So for myself, I'd think, oh, that'd be fantastic. Imagine that every morning waking up and looking out of the wicket and everything like that. But it's their job. So if you're getting home after your, what is a long day, including the warm up, the warm down, and then you're wanting to just have some time off and you're confronted with your workplace, that along with the elements of not being able to see your family, the performance pressures, you're still getting interference from fans on social media. I don't think it's any surprise to people that causes a lot of stress and strain. And one benefit of big name players speaking out about this is it makes it easy for other people to talk about it. Unfortunately, there does still seem to be in the media, whether that's individuals on social media or people writing on behalf of media outlets, a cap on empathy sometimes, that we'd say we feel sorry for someone or we'll understand their situation up to a certain point, but then we say they're an international cricketer and they're getting paid well, when they can still be subject to the range of emotions and feelings that everyone else is. So those things you mentioned, like performance being judged on statistical data, and the time away from home, anyone who's felt homesick after maybe being on the road for a bit of time, wanting to see their family, their kids and so on, can see an insight to that. How it can be dealt with, well, it's probably it's something which seems to be linked to the scheduling. Some recommendations have been made regarding the impact of scheduling, but of course ICC and World Cricket need the cricketers to be playing to put this product out there for the sponsors and for the fans, and of course for the integrity of the game. So we're probably going to see, just in my view, and from what I've heard from those who are involved at that level, is that you'll see more and more of the rotation of squads, of people having tours where they don't travel with the team and they come back for the next one. A lot more differentiation between different formats, because I think Justin Langer was saying he spent something like 300 days a year out on the road, and that alone is enough of a trigger for people. Never mind then the fact that you've got a lot of pressures on as well. So sometimes we could maybe flip it around and say, instead of why is it that so many players are encountering difficulties, what is it about these people, the exceptional abilities a lot of them have to be able to deal with this? Why is it that actually more aren't struggling or being diagnosed with disorders as a result? And who knows, maybe that there's of course a grey area where people can be, they maybe not speaking out about it, they're struggling, but they're seeking help more privately. But yeah, it's actually a wonder to me sometimes that there isn't more cases of this. And are we nowhere near the peak of what's going to be the result of this?
Yeah. Do you think world cricket at the moment, the way it's going with more cricket, I think there's talk about the IPL expanding more than it has been this year with 10 new teams. I think they're going to play more games next season or something like that. Do you think this is sustainable, the way that it's going at the moment? And do you think we could have a crisis on our hands potentially with mental health with cricketers if it goes on like this?
Certainly potentially. And I remember speaking to a sports psychiatrist here in the UK about this, and his firm recommendations were that the workloads need to be managed. If I compare it to the dominant sport here in the UK, that of football and the English Premier League, there's of course a ton of demands on the players there. But when it comes to the travel elements of it, it's nothing compared to international cricketers, because if you play for Liverpool or play for Manchester United, for the most part, you'll train within commuting distance of your home. You play half of your games at home. You might go on the road for away games, but often they'll charter a flight to get there and back quickly. You may well have European competitions, but as it says on the tin, it's Europe, so you'll be there back relatively quickly. Whereas some of these tours where England going to Australia or Australia going to South Africa, West Indies going to Sri Lanka, whatever it be, these are long journeys, and they don't just turn up and play for a few days. It's over a course of weeks and months often. So I don't know what point we've got to reach for people to take it a bit more seriously, rather than it being an accepted thing that we have this as a fallout. I just don't know. And the optimist in me hopes that there'll just be some things that are being tinkered with around the edges that just reduce the impact of this, so that we can move towards a more sustainable model for the players' welfare and well-being, as well as everything else that comes into it.
Yeah. Do you think the ICC have a clear plan on mental health? Do you think they're doing enough? As we've talked about, the scheduling's increasing and that. So do you think they need a more clear strategy going forward to deal with mental health and well-being of the players and not treat them like robots?
Well, yeah, I think every area, every workplace could do with some different types of thinking that's less reactive, that's trying to forecast how you can help people rather than how you can just deal with the fallout of what might go on. And ICC will be privy to quite a lot of forward-thinking stuff that comes out from Australia particularly. PCA have been brilliant in England in terms of pushing player welfare. So I think all these things are there and coming together. And the hope is within the next months and years that there is something done to accommodate both the ideals and the demands of world cricket, but also the very people that make it such an attractive sport being looked after that little bit better as well. But I can't sit here and say what the answer is, because I don't have really a clue how they manage to schedule all these games and how it weaves together. But that should definitely be right at the forefront of how they consider the structure of the World Game.
Let's move on to our next topic, Mark, and talk about mental health education. Education on mental health is important. As we mentioned earlier, it's important to recognize the signs or a decline in your own mental health or in someone else's mental health, Mark. Now, you go around the UK educating cricketers, cricket clubs, coaches, parents on mental health, and with opening up. And many international teams are providing education courses to their international players as well on mental health. Mark, how important is it to be educated on mental health?
Well, it's perhaps as important as any topic you could receive education on because of the impact it has on every area of your life. Being able to have skills like resilience and dealing with stress and working out how things are best approached from your perspective. So I think it's something that naturally comes within cricket. You can link to those mental skills which we talked about earlier, but it's also finding the right way of doing it and sometimes making it less formal, more conversational. But the key has to be that it's not directive and prescriptive about how people should do things, because everyone has their own unique experience of the world, and just trying to provide some things that can be used and access to help with that is really important in terms of looking after your mental health, but also providing some sound resources that can be accessed for support wherever you are in the country or across the world, so that people know who they can get in touch with if they are encountering problems, just the same as we'd know who to get in touch with if we were struggling with another part of our body.
Yeah, that's important to recognize the changes in your own physical health, but also your mental health as well. So it's important to recognize the signs and educate yourself on mental health, which is important. Speaking about recognizing the signs, Mark, let's talk about recognizing the signs of a decline in your own mental health and in someone else's mental health. So what are the signs to look out for, Mark?
Well, I think probably the main thing is they generally say clinically, if something's been going on for a fortnight or longer in terms of decline in mental health, then that's something that could well be something that could be approached in terms of it being an illness or a problem, rather than just having a rough patch. So for that, with that in mind, I think it's things like noticing a persistent low mood, also a lack of interest in things that you care about, lack of concentration, problems with sleep, can also be issues with appetite. But overall, the main thing is a big change in how we are, whether that's us as an individual or someone close to us. If we notice, which we generally can do when someone isn't quite themselves, that's a great opportunity to have a discussion, ask them how they are. It doesn't have to be anything minded in terms of, is there anything wrong with you mentally? It can just be a nice conversation, say, you're okay, you don't seem yourself. And I remember this example from a few years ago. I remember a player saying to me, he reacted completely differently out of the blue to something and really sort of lost his temper. And instead of people around him saying, are you okay? You're not usually like that. The reaction was dominated by, oh, that response was inappropriate, that wasn't on, and being very critical. So if we can be a bit kinder and realize that maybe if people are behaving differently and they appear to be struggling, it might be worth offering them that bit of support, and they might just need someone to listen to what they've got to say. But yeah, any big changes that appear obvious are the things worth looking out for. And then beneath that, those changes can be around things like sleep, appetite, of course, mood, enjoyment. And then there'll be things which can be very particular to individuals. But if we're looking out for that change in others, it at least gives us the chance to have the conversation.
Yeah. let's talk about how to go about seeking help for yourself, and if someone has confided in you about their own mental health issues. So, Mark, how should people go about seeking help for their own mental health? And how should they go about trying to help someone else who's confided in them about their own mental health issues?
Mm. This is always the toughest, I suppose, because it's very straightforward to say to someone that they need to talk about how they're feeling. When we are in the midst of difficulties, that can be almost the last thing that we want to do. But if we can get people more used to talking about their thoughts and their emotions at an earlier stage, it hopefully isn't as daunting when there are issues and problems there. So within cricket clubs, communities, having more of a ethos of sharing, whether that be about how you feel the game's gone, how you feel you are in terms of your form, or things more personal, then that can be breaking down some of those barriers to people thinking, will they be heard? Is someone going to just misunderstand them or mock them even? So if we can do that more proactively earlier, but if we are in that position where we do feel like we are struggling, we recognize that something isn't quite right, but it's hard to speak about it, seeing our mental health as we do our physical health is the most important thing, realizing that a doctor is there to help us mentally just as much as physically. In the UK with our NHS, the general practitioners that you go and see, they over half of their appointments are for problems with mental health. So people have this greater understanding of it now. In terms of helping someone who's confided in us, the most important thing I've found to remember is we don't need to fix it for them. We don't need to be the clinician who provides the solutions. Just listening genuinely, not providing advice, not providing solutions or ways to fix it, just listening and making them feel like they've been heard is a huge step. And then work with them to get them towards where that help would be. Practical offer of saying, would you like to maybe chat about this again next week? Would it help if we went for a cup of coffee and did this? Or when are you going to go and see the doctor? Because it does seem like you're not living your life the way you'd like to at the moment. These things are getting in the way of it. And anything practical along those lines, and be a gentle force to get them towards that. It could even be to offer them a lift to their doctors, or just to check in on them to see how it went and show that you care. Because I think what I found is, in my experience of having depression, is it tells you a lot of the time that no one cares, and that this is something which is just for you. So someone reminding you that actually they do care and they do have your interests at heart can just start to slowly but surely penetrate through that myth that your misguided thinking is giving you.
Yeah, those are pretty good tips. So for those listening or watching this episode, hopefully those tips can help you in terms of your mental health and well-being, and trying to seek help and help others, which is important. Speaking about education, there are many great organizations that can help you. And if this has raised any concerns about your own mental health and you need to seek some help, please seek help from the various organizations in your country available to you. There are so many good organizations in Australia that can help you, like Lifeline, 13 11 14, Headspace, Beyond Blue, Are You OK? The Resilience Project by Huveng Cullenberg's pretty good. I'll leave a link to those in the description of this episode. Now, we may have some people watching or listening from the UK. Samaritans is one good organization that can help you. Any other organizations you can think of in the UK, Mark, that people who may be from the UK could use to help them with their mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. Samaritans is a great shout. We've supported ever since the beginning of Open Up Cricket a charity called Calm. They're available online, calmzone.net, and their phone line is 0800 585858. And they do similar thing to the Samaritans in terms of providing someone to speak to when someone really needs it. And of course, out there as well, there's other things that have been there to support people, such as Mind. But I'd say within the UK, checking out the NHS resources on mental health, a very simple, straightforward, and can guide you towards where you can get the support that's needed.
Yep. So we'll leave a link to all of those organizations in the description below, so you can check them out, and hopefully they can help you with your own mental health issues and well-being. Let's move on to our next topic, Mark, and let's talk about strategies to deal with our own mental health. There are so many strategies out there, Mark, to help us with our own mental health on a daily basis, but often people get confused about which strategies to choose and implement to help them with their mental health. There's so many out there. People just get overwhelmed. So Mark, what are some strategies could we use to help us with our mental health?
Yeah, you're right. There is a lot there, and that can be overwhelming for people trying to pick a method that might work for them. So I think that knowledge is important to start with, that there is lots of things out there and something will work for you, rather than thinking there's too much to pick from, knowing that however long it takes, there will be something that just clicks for everyone. So I think from my perspective, one of the things that has made such a big difference to myself and many others is having the ability to be able to just be more, we hear this a lot, but be more present and be able to live more in what's happening at an individual moment, because then you remove the ideas of things that have gone on in the past or in the future which you can't change in that moment, and just doing what you can, one thing at a time. So mindfulness and meditation are really good routes to doing this, and I think that's probably the one thing I would advocate. It's not for everyone, of course, because nothing is for everyone. But if by trying it, someone realizes it isn't quite for them, then they're a step closer to what might be. But as happens with many, many people, they find that there's something really powerful in it, then it's of benefit to them. And meditation and mindfulness isn't about what the preconceptions might be about the sort of Far Eastern practice where you have to have this religious devotion to it, you need to sit in a certain way. Just quite simply is narrowing your concentration to one thing at a time in that formal practice, but also day to day when you're going for a walk in the park, just consciously thinking about what you can hear, switching on that sense, or just really deliberately scanning a room for what you can see and just taking yourself into that moment. I always find it really hard to explain because it's so personal and experience, but if anyone can check out things like Smiling Mind or Headspace, they guide people through everything. And for the sake of 5 or 10 minutes a day, that can be something you can tick off, knowing that that's been an attempt at improving your mental fitness.
Yeah. Yeah. When people often, as you mentioned with meditation, often they have that stigma about, hippies and, that sort of thing. I don't really want to do that. But I've done some meditation myself, and it's quite powerful when you practice it and get used to it. Then it can be a very useful tool to use to deal with your own mental health, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's just about being curious and saying, I'll give this a go. I won't think about what it could be. I will just give it a go and see what it is for me. And if you genuinely throw yourself into it, I think a lot of people will be pleasantly surprised by what it can do for them. Or if it doesn't just sit right for them, good on you for trying. And what's next on the list that could work for you?
Yeah. And as you said, it's just being curious. Just try different things. And if they work for you, do them. If they don't, at least you tried, but it's probably not for you. So there's many strategies out there that you can use. And many organizations have ways of dealing with your own mental health, as we mentioned before, with the resources in those organizations. They have ways and strategies you can implement into your daily life to control your mental health. Isn't that right, Mark?
That's it. Yeah. And it's all about making it something which isn't a huge addition to your regular day-to-day, just something that can be there as a small thing, which you've got there, which is making a positive difference.
Yeah. Let's move on to our final topic of this discussion today, Mark, and let's talk about the stigma around mental health. And there's often a stigma around mental health. People think that mental health is a weakness, in particular men. Men find it difficult to speak about their problems with their own mental health and find it difficult to speak about their physical health as well. Men don't want to talk about their mental health issues because they may get judged by their friends. And as I mentioned before, it's a sign of a weakness. So they don't want to express that. People fear mental health and don't wish to go through it or have any mental illnesses that associate itself with mental health. Mark, mental health is always something we're going to have to deal with on an ongoing basis in our lives. As we mentioned earlier, it's that continuum. It never stops. It never goes away. It's always there in the background. It's always there in our daily lives. So we need to break down the barrier and the stigma associated with mental health. My question to you is, Mark, why do we have this stigma towards mental health, and why is it important to break the stigma on mental health?
Yeah, the stigma does still surely exist, even if it is to a lesser extent than it would have been in years gone by. And we look through the cricketing experience, certainly here in the UK, where Marcus Trescothick's example was met with a lot of skepticism and a lot of judgmental, ill-informed comments about how he should be feeling when it's his life. And then we go forward, we had Jonathan Trott's example where it was more mixed. And then you get towards now Ben Stokes' recent example where overwhelmingly the reaction is positive and a lot more respectful of the fact that everyone has different experiences within their life. But what we see on the surface may well be very different to how people individually approach it, and it can be negative still. There's still things which stop people talking about things that they are going through, just in the same way that there's physical illnesses which people still struggle to seek help for. We have big campaigns with regards checking different parts of your body for lumps and bumps which might be signs of cancer, and we still have people, for reasons that are multiple, not doing that. So it's still an ongoing battle to address those things which can be regarded as a weakness or asking for help. But the way we do it surely is talking about the topic more, but also reframing this idea of mental health as not just being about the negatives, because people don't want to just have a conversation about problems. If we can get mental health as a term more used as something which is the whole spectrum, the whole continuum, then there's something in there for everyone. When we talk about how mentally tough someone was, when we think about what must be going through Joe Root's mind to be able to churn out run after run after run, that's mental health just as much as it is someone at the other end of the continuum really struggling. So if we get used to talking about it more, it demystifies it. And then we realize for everyone who's doing times in life where they do really well, there'll be times where they don't do so well. And that is normal, and we can accept that, so that it's actually quite odd for people to have a negative view of something that can happen to all of us, and to a varying degree does happen to all of us.
Yeah. Is it a generational thing as well? Towards mental health, that people of older generations think that, they're just soft, that you got to toughen up and stuff like that. Do you think it's more generational in people's views towards mental health?
It can be, yeah. Certainly get examples of where people's views are rooted in what an orthodoxy would have been in the past. But we still see that there's issues with younger people asking for help, and maybe being, in some ways, with there being a greater conversation about mental illness, particularly, people feeling like what someone else is describing isn't quite what they're experiencing, so maybe that isn't a mental illness, and there's still confusion, a lack of clarity about what actually is a decline in someone's health. So for that reason and many others, the importance of talking and getting good information out there is vital.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully we can break down the stigma. Do you think we'll ever break it, or do you think we'll keep just chipping away at it and it will happen in years to come? Probably not straight away.
Yeah, I think I think we can't imagine something happening overnight or in a very short period of time, because attitudes persist no matter what they are. But that idea of chipping away at it means that we're not defeated by saying, oh, we can't deal with it wholly. It'll make a difference to a person, 2 people, 4 people, 8 people, on and on as time develops. So if each individual person who's got an interest in this just makes it their mission to try and influence things positively in the circle that they find themselves in, then that effect going forward can be really powerful. And a bit like the practice of mindfulness, not worrying too much about what happens on a grander scale, bringing it more to home and saying, what can I do? And that's really what Open Up Cricket has been, saying, right, well, what can I do? If I can speak to people about this, hopefully that makes a bit of an impact. It gets someone thinking at least, or reading something. They might mention it to someone, and then you're like, that's great. That's the idea that I suppose we've all got to have.
Yeah. Just one more question before we wrap up today's discussion, which has been an enjoyable discussion. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I've learned so much myself. And I hope everyone's learned a bit about mental health, a bit more in this episode. Do you think that the last 2 years, where we've gone through a lot of tough days as a whole universe, in terms of the whole world going through the same problems, do you think that's made people more wary about their own mental health? And do you think that's helped try and chip away at the stigma towards it, because people have experienced their own battles with mental health during the last 2 years, especially in the UK, who's done it tougher than anyone else in the world? Do you think people have opened up more during the last 2 years?
I reckon they have. I think that particularly in the real center of the pandemic and the lockdown and the problems that brought for people, it was a given that people would be finding things difficult. So that got rid of some of the aspects of, is it okay to talk about how I'm feeling? Is it okay to say I'm struggling? Because most conversations you'd have would be, how are you coping with this? And it was fine to say, oh, actually, I'm missing this a lot, or I'm really struggling with that. And I think that brought things forward quite a lot, to realise that because we're all going through times that are different, and in a lot of cases very challenging, we understand how that could affect other people more. It's now just to what extent that's kept going. Have we been complacent and thought that was just a period in time and we move back to maybe being more disconnected? I'm not sure, but it definitely made a big impact and made people at least consider the issue quite a bit more than they had done before. And I think we probably have some carry on from that going forward now.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thanks for joining me today. It's been great. Thank you for giving up your time today to speak to me about opening up and about mental health. And I've enjoyed our chat immensely today. I've learned so much, and I hope everyone's learned a lot as well. Where can people get in touch with you, Mark, opening up, and yourself? Where can they find you?
Yeah, the website is openingupcricket.com. If you're on Twitter, we're at openingupcc, Instagram, Opening Up Cricket, same with Facebook. So please do follow us on there. Any questions, any comments, just send us a message through those channels. It'd be great to have a chat.
Yeah, we'll leave a link to all of those in the description of this episode. There's so many links associated with Opening Up, but we'll try our best to get all of them in there, so you can check out the good work that Mark does and hopefully can benefit from it, as I have today, listening to Mark's words of wisdom about mental health and well-being, which has been fantastic. Before we go, also on the podcast, we did a couple of episodes on mental health ourselves with my cricket coach, Luke, and from Cricket Mentoring, Tom Scully. I do suggest to everyone check them out. Please do. We talked a lot about mental health. And here on the podcast, we're trying to bring awareness and get the conversation started about mental health and our well-being, because it's an important topic to talk about, especially in men. We don't like to talk about our feelings and express them. We don't know quite how to express our feelings. And it's very important to ask for help, seek help, and help others during difficult times. Isn't that right, Mark?
Oh, yeah. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
It is. Before we go, Mark, any last advice, a minute advice would you give to someone about mental health? Any tips, any advice before we go?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to try and find a way of talking about it like it's not a big daunting topic. So look at your favorite cricket players, look at what's going on in the world of cricket, and try and talk about the mental side of their game and how that can be something which then sparks a conversation. So Joe Root, as an example, is an English fan at the moment, gone past his 10,000th run in Test match cricket. What a great opportunity to talk about his resilience, his mental strength, how he found it really difficult as captain. He was talking about how it led to sort of some unhealthy elements. What does that mean? Unpack that, because it's a conversation we'd want to have about cricket anyway. We're just making it relevant to another topic of mental health and not making mental health one conversation and cricket another, but trying to tie the two together. And I think we see the benefit if we do that.
Absolutely. And it's important to work not only on our physical fitness, but our mental fitness as well. It's good to work on the two and not push it aside or sweep it underneath the carpet. So once again, Mark, thank you for joining me today. And before we go, remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Most of the podcast is now available on Anchor, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.